Episode 1. Moving to a New City. Hello, my name is Isaac. I want to share my story with you. It is a special story because it's about a big change in my life. This is the story of how I moved to a new city and started a new life. Let me begin by telling you a little about myself. I was born and raised in a small town. My town was quiet and peaceful. Everyone knew each other, and life was simple. The streets were narrow, with trees lining both sides. There were only a few shops, and we had a small park where people would walk or sit and talk. I lived in a house with my family. My parents, my sister, and I lived there together for many years. Life in a small town was nice, but it was also slow. Every day felt the same. I would wake up, go to work, and come back home. There wasn't much excitement or new things to do. As I grew older, I started to feel that I wanted more. I wanted to see new places, meet new people, and try new things. I had dreams of exploring a big city, living in a place with tall buildings, busy streets, and bright lights. I wanted to find new opportunities for work and learn new skills. I thought about it for a long time. At first, the idea of leaving my small town seemed scary. What if I didn't like the new city? What if I couldn't find a job? What if I got lonely? These questions made me nervous. But something inside me kept pushing me. I knew that staying in my small town wouldn't make me happy forever. I needed to take a risk and try something new. So, one day, I made the decision. I was going to move to a big city. It wasn't an easy choice, but I felt excited. I felt ready for a new adventure. Before I moved, I talked to my family and friends about my decision. My parents were surprised at first, but they understood. They knew I wanted to grow and experience something different. My sister was excited for me. She said, "You will do great. You will love the city." My friends were a little sad because they would miss me, but they promised to visit me in my new home. I packed my bags carefully. I didn't have a lot of things to take with me, but I made sure to bring the important items. I packed my clothes, my favorite books, and a few things that reminded me of home. I also brought a map of the city because I knew I would get lost easily. As I closed my suitcase, I felt both excited and scared. I was really doing it. I was leaving my old life behind and starting fresh. The day I moved was sunny and bright. It felt like the perfect day for a new beginning. I said goodbye to my family and friends at the train station. My mom hugged me tightly and said, "Be careful, and don't forget to call us." I smiled and promised that I would. As the train started to move, I looked out of the window and waved goodbye to my old town. I knew that when I returned, things would never be the same. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I was ready to find out. Now, here I am, in my new city. The streets are so different from the ones back home. They are wide and full of people. Cars drive fast, and there are buses, trains, and bicycles everywhere. The buildings are tall, much taller than I imagined. Some of them have shiny windows that reflect the sunlight, making the city look even bigger and brighter. I have only been here for a short time, but I already feel that this place is full of possibilities. I moved here because I wanted a change. I wanted to learn new things, meet new people, and experience a different way of life. This is the beginning of my new adventure, and I am excited to see where it will take me. Episode 2. First Day in the New City. The day I moved to the new city felt like a dream. I had been thinking about this moment for so long, and now it was finally happening. My bags were packed, my ticket was in hand, and I was ready to start this new chapter of my life. I took one last look at my old home, the house where I had spent so many years. I smiled, feeling a mix of sadness and excitement. It was hard to say goodbye to the familiar, but the thought of what was waiting for me in the city kept me moving forward. The journey to the city was long. I traveled by train, watching the scenery change from the peaceful countryside to the busy roads and tall buildings of the city. As the train moved faster, I could feel my heart beating in rhythm with it, my excitement growing with each passing mile. I passed small villages, wide fields, and quiet towns, all of them slowly disappearing behind me. Soon the landscape began to change. The buildings became taller, the roads busier, and there were more cars and people everywhere. The air felt different, too. It was faster, more alive, like the city itself was buzzing with energy. When the train finally arrived at the city station, I stepped off and immediately felt the difference. The city was big, much bigger than I had imagined. People were everywhere. Some were walking quickly with purpose, while others stood in groups talking or looking at their phones. I heard the sound of traffic, cars honking, buses stopping, and the hum of conversations in many different languages. It was loud, busy, and exciting. I could feel the energy of the city all around me. The buildings were enormous, towering over me like giants. I looked up and saw glass windows reflecting the sunlight, making the whole city shine. It was beautiful and a little overwhelming. I had a map of the city with me, and I knew where I needed to go. My new home was a small apartment not far from the city center. I got into a taxi and gave the driver the address. As we drove through the streets, I tried to take in everything I saw. There were tall office buildings, shops on every corner, and restaurants with colorful signs. The streets were filled with people. Some were hurrying to work, while others were sitting at cafes, drinking coffee and chatting with friends. It was so different from my small town, where everything moved slowly. Here, it felt like the city was always moving, always alive. We passed a beautiful park, full of trees, flowers, and people walking or sitting on benches. I smiled, thinking how nice it would be to come here and relax after a long day. The park was only a short walk from my apartment, and I imagined myself coming here often, maybe to read a book or just enjoy the fresh air. Finally, the taxi stopped in front of a tall building. This was it, my new home. I got out of the taxi and looked up at the building. It wasn't as big as some of the other buildings in the city, but it was still much taller than anything back in my small town. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I grabbed my bags and walked inside. The building had a small lobby with a few chairs and a notice board with information about events happening in the neighborhood. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. As the doors opened, I felt a little nervous. This was the first time I would see my new home. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small but cozy. There was a living room with a couch and a small table, a kitchen with everything I needed, and a bedroom with a bed and a window that looked out onto the street. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and there were a few pictures on the walls. Nothing fancy, but it felt welcoming. I put my bags down and took a deep breath. This was my new home. It felt strange at first. Everything was different from my old house. There was no garden, no big kitchen like back home, but it was nice in its own way. The apartment was clean and bright, and I could already see myself getting comfortable here. The best part of the apartment was the view from the window. From my bedroom window, I could see the park. I watched as people walked by, some with dogs, some jogging, and others sitting on the grass, enjoying the sunshine. It made me feel connected to the city, like I was already part of its rhythm. I smiled as I imagined myself going for walks in that park, exploring the different paths, and maybe even meeting new people. That evening, after unpacking my things, I decided to go out and explore the neighborhood. I wanted to get familiar with my surroundings. The streets were lively, with people going in and out of shops, cafes, and restaurants. The city was full of life, even as the sun began to set. I walked past small stores that sold everything from clothes to food, and I could smell delicious food coming from the many restaurants that lined the street. The lights from the buildings and street lamps made the city look even more magical at night. I wandered around for a while, taking in the sights and sounds. Everything felt new and exciting. I knew it would take some time to get used to this new life, but I was ready. I was here, in this big city, and I was excited to see what adventures were waiting for me. When I finally returned to my apartment, I felt tired but happy. I sat by the window, looking out at the park, and thought about how far I had come. Moving to the city was a big step for me, but I knew I had made the right decision. This city was full of opportunities, and I couldn't wait to explore them all. Episode 3: First Challenges. The first morning in my new apartment was quiet and peaceful. I woke up early, feeling excited to explore the city. I had a lot to do, unpacking more of my things, getting some groceries, and finding out where the nearest bus stop was so I could get around easily. But first, I wanted to take a walk and see more of the neighborhood. I grabbed my map, slipped on my shoes, and headed out the door. The city was already awake. People were walking briskly down the sidewalks. Cars honked as they passed by, and I could hear the distant sounds of construction somewhere nearby. I smiled, taking in the bustling energy of my new home. Everything seemed so new and full of life. I walked down the street, feeling a little nervous but also excited. The streets were bigger and busier than the ones I was used to, but I was determined to find my way. My first task was to find the grocery store. I needed to buy some food for the week, and I had heard that there was a good store not far from my apartment. According to the map, it should only be a 10-minute walk. Confidently, I started walking in what I thought was the right direction. But after about 15 minutes, I started to feel unsure. The buildings around me didn't look like the ones near my apartment, and the streets seemed unfamiliar. I looked around, hoping to see a sign or something that would tell me I was on the right track, but everything looked the same. Tall buildings, crowded streets, and people rushing by. I stopped and checked my map again. I had been walking in the wrong direction the whole time. I felt a little embarrassed and laughed at myself. This was my first real challenge in the city, finding my way. I turned around and tried to retrace my steps, but now I wasn't sure which street I had come from. The city was so big, and every corner looked similar. The longer I walked, the more confused I became. After a while, I had to admit to myself I was completely lost. Feeling a bit frustrated, I stood on the sidewalk, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I go back home and try again later? But then I realized I didn't even know how to get back to my apartment. I was lost, and the map didn't seem to help. All the streets looked the same, and I couldn't remember the names of any of the places I had passed. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that it was okay to get lost. This was part of the adventure, part of learning to live in a new place. I just needed to stay calm and figure out how to ask for help. I looked around at the people walking by. Everyone seemed busy, rushing to work or talking on their phones. I didn't want to bother anyone, but I knew I needed help. Finally, I saw a woman standing outside a small cafe. She looked relaxed, sipping her coffee and reading a book. I decided to ask her for directions. I approached her slowly, feeling a little shy. "Excuse me," I said politely. "I'm new to the city, and I think I'm lost. Can you help me find the grocery store?" The woman looked up from her book and smiled warmly. "Of course," she said. "Where are you trying to go?" I showed her the name of the store on my map. She nodded and said, "Ah, I know that place." "You're not too far, actually. You just took a wrong turn a few streets back. Let me show you the way." I felt relieved. She seemed so kind and willing to help. As we walked together, she pointed out a few important places along the way. "There's a bus stop over there," she said, pointing to the corner of the street. "You can catch the number 12 bus from there, which will take you to the city center. And just a few blocks down, you'll find a park. It's a great spot to relax after a busy day." We continued walking, and she told me more about the city. "I've lived here for 5 years now," she said. "At first, I felt lost too. It's a big city, and it can be overwhelming. But once you get to know the streets and the people, it starts to feel like home. You'll see." Her words made me feel better. I realized that getting lost wasn't such a bad thing after all. It was a part of learning, a part of growing, and now I had met someone new who was kind enough to help me. As we turned the corner, the grocery store finally came into view. "Here you go," she said, smiling. "You found it." I thanked her gratefully. "Thank you so much for your help," I said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." She waved off my thanks. "No problem at all. We've all been lost at some point. If you ever need help again, don't be afraid to ask someone. People here are usually happy to help." As she walked away, I felt a sense of relief. I had found the grocery store, and more importantly, I had learned a valuable lesson. It's okay to ask for help when you need it. The city might be big and unfamiliar, but I didn't have to face it alone. There were kind people here, just like back in my small town. I smiled as I walked into the grocery store, feeling more confident than before. This was just one of many challenges I would face, but now I knew I could handle them. After finishing my shopping, I took a deep breath and looked at the map again. This time, I was determined not to get lost. I carefully followed the directions and managed to find my way back to the apartment without any problems. When I arrived home, I felt proud of myself. I had faced my first challenge in the city and succeeded. Sure, I got lost, but I had also found my way and met a kind person along the way. It was a small victory, but it felt like a big step forward. That evening, as I sat by the window watching the busy streets below, I thought about the day's events. Getting lost in the city had taught me that challenges are a part of life. They might be scary at first, but they also give us a chance to learn and grow, and sometimes those challenges can lead to unexpected kindness from strangers. I smiled to myself, feeling more at home in the city than I had that morning. There would be more challenges ahead, I was sure of it. But now, I felt ready to face them. After all, this was my new life, and every challenge was just another part of the adventure. Episode 4: Building Daily Life. As the days passed, I slowly started to settle into my new life in the city. The initial excitement of moving was beginning to fade, and reality was setting in. Now, it was time to build a daily routine, find places that made me feel comfortable, and try to make this big city feel like home. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of the city outside my window, cars honking, people chatting on the sidewalks, and the occasional barking of a dog walking with its owner. It was all so different from the quiet mornings I had back home, but in a way, it was comforting. It reminded me that I was part of something bigger now, a city filled with life and movement. One of the first things I wanted to do was find a few spots where I could go to relax, work, or just enjoy the atmosphere. I had already explored a bit and had a list of places I wanted to check out. So, on a bright sunny morning, I put on my shoes, grabbed my bag, and set out to discover more of the city. My first stop was a local cafe that I had heard about from the woman who helped me when I got lost. She had mentioned that it was a quiet place, perfect for reading or just enjoying a cup of coffee. When I arrived, I was not disappointed. The cafe was small and cozy, with wooden tables and large windows that let in plenty of sunlight. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and soft music played in the background. It was exactly what I had been looking for. I ordered a cup of coffee and found a seat by the window. From there, I could watch people passing by on the street while I sipped my drink. The cafe quickly became one of my favorite spots. I started going there almost every day, sometimes to read a book, sometimes to work on my laptop, and sometimes just to relax. The baristas started to recognize me, and I liked that small sense of familiarity in such a big city. Next on my list was the library. Back home, the library had always been one of my favorite places to visit. I loved the quiet, the smell of old books, and the way time seemed to slow down when you were surrounded by so much knowledge. I hoped I would find something similar in the city. The library here was much bigger than the one I was used to. It had several floors, each filled with books on every topic imaginable. There were study areas, computer stations, and even a small cafe on the ground floor. I wandered through the aisles, amazed at the size of the place. It was a little overwhelming, but I knew I would come back often. On the weekends, I also started visiting a nearby park. The park was large and beautiful, with trees, walking paths, and a small lake in the middle. There were always people there, families having picnics, children playing, and joggers running along the paths. I found a quiet spot near the lake where I could sit and read or just enjoy the peacefulness of nature. It became my go-to place whenever I needed a break from the noise and busyness of the city. As I explored more, I began to create a routine for myself. Every few days, I would go to the grocery store to pick up food for the week. I had gotten better at navigating the streets, and now I could get there without getting lost. It felt like a small victory each time I made it to the store and back without any trouble. I also made it a habit to go for a walk every morning. Sometimes I would explore new neighborhoods, and other times I would just wander around the familiar streets near my apartment. Each walk helped me learn more about the city and made me feel more at home. Another part of my routine was visiting the local market on Saturdays. The market was always full of life, vendors selling fresh fruits and vegetables, artisans displaying their handmade goods, and musicians playing lively tunes. I loved walking through the market, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells. There was something special about buying fresh produce directly from the farmers who grew it. It reminded me of the farmers' markets back home, but on a much larger scale. The market became one of my favorite weekend activities, and it was a great way to feel connected to the local community. Slowly but surely, I started to find a rhythm in my new life. I had my favorite cafe, my peaceful spot in the park, and the bustling market to look forward to on the weekends. I was starting to feel more confident, and the city didn't seem as intimidating as it once had. Every day I found new places to explore and new reasons to love my new home. But the best part was the small successes that came with each passing day. The first time I managed to navigate the city without using a map felt like a major achievement. I no longer felt like a tourist, lost and unsure of my surroundings. I was starting to feel like a local, someone who belonged here. Whether it was finding a shortcut to the grocery store or remembering the names of the streets near my apartment, each small victory made me feel more comfortable and capable. Even little things, like knowing which bus to take or understanding the best time to visit the market, made a big difference in my daily life. These small successes gave me a sense of independence and control. I was no longer overwhelmed by the size of the city or the fast pace of life. Instead, I felt like I was adapting, learning, and growing with each new experience. As I built my daily routine, I realized that these small moments, finding a favorite cafe, enjoying a quiet afternoon in the park, mastering the bus system, were what truly made the city feel like home. It wasn't about the grand adventures or big milestones, but about the little things that made each day feel special. Now, when I woke up in the morning, I didn't feel nervous or uncertain about what the day would bring. I had a routine, I had my favorite spots, and I had the confidence to explore the city on my own terms. The city no longer felt like a strange, overwhelming place. It felt like my home. Episode 5: Meeting New People. As I continued to settle into my new city, I realized that building a life wasn't just about finding the best places to go or creating a comfortable routine. It was also about connecting with the people around me. At first, it seemed like everyone in the city was rushing somewhere, too busy to stop and chat. I felt like a stranger, passing by in the middle of all this activity. But soon enough, opportunities to meet new people began to arise, and my journey to make friends and build relationships began. It started at work. I had recently started my job at a small office in the heart of the city. On my first day, I was both excited and nervous. I had done well to find my way there without getting lost, but now came the real challenge: meeting my coworkers. The office was filled with people from different backgrounds, each busy with their own tasks, but they seemed friendly. The first person to approach me was Sarah, a kind woman with a bright smile. She had been working at the company for a few years, and she offered to show me around. "Hi there! You must be the new team member," Sarah said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah. Let me know if you need any help settling in." Her warm greeting instantly made me feel at ease. As she gave me a tour of the office, introducing me to different colleagues, I noticed how diverse the team was. People from different parts of the country, even different parts of the world, worked together here. Each person seemed to bring something unique to the office. Some spoke with accents I hadn't heard before, and many shared stories about their home countries. It was fascinating to be surrounded by so many different cultures, all in one place. During lunch breaks, I started sitting with a few of my co-workers. Sarah, of course, along with James and Lisa, who were both from the same department. Our conversations were light at first, mostly about work or the city, but slowly we began to share more personal stories. James, for instance, told me about his love for cooking and how he spent his weekends experimenting with new recipes. Lisa was an avid traveler and had recently returned from a trip to Japan. I found their stories inspiring, and it was nice to bond over shared interests. Slowly but surely, I was beginning to feel like part of the team, but work wasn't the only place where I started meeting people. Back at my apartment building, I had been running into the same faces almost every day. There was the elderly man who lived on the first floor, always sitting on the bench outside in the mornings with his newspaper. Then, there was the young couple who lived a few doors down from me. At first, these encounters were brief, just polite nods or the occasional good morning as we passed each other in the hallway. One evening, as I was returning from the grocery store, my neighbor, the elderly man from the first floor, was struggling to carry a few bags of his own. I offered to help him, and he gratefully accepted. "Thank you, young man," he said with a smile as we walked together to his door. "It's nice to see people helping each other out in this big city." From that day on, we started chatting whenever we saw each other. His name was Mr. Johnson, and he had lived in the city for over 40 years. He knew the history of the neighborhood, the best places to eat, and even the stories behind some of the old buildings nearby. Our conversations became a daily part of my routine, and I enjoyed listening to his wisdom and humor. He would often give me advice on how to navigate life in the city, always reminding me to stay patient and open to new experiences. Another significant moment came when I was invited to a small gathering by the young couple next door. They were celebrating their anniversary and wanted to invite a few of their neighbors over for a casual get-together. I was hesitant at first. After all, I didn't know them that well, but I decided to go. It seemed like a good opportunity to meet more people in the building. The gathering was small but lively. There were a few other neighbors, including a woman named Clara, who lived 2 floors up. Clara was a teacher at a nearby school, and she had been living in the building for several years. We bonded quickly, talking about the city, our favorite places to visit, and even exchanging recommendations for restaurants. As the evening went on, I found myself laughing, chatting, and feeling much more comfortable than I had expected. The conversations were casual and friendly, and I realized that despite the hustle and bustle of city life, there were plenty of people here who valued community and connection. Meeting new people also meant learning about different cultures, especially in such a diverse city. One day, while exploring a different part of town, I came across a street festival. Bright banners were strung between the buildings. Music filled the air, and the smell of delicious food wafted through the crowd. Curious, I wandered through the festival, stopping at various stalls to see what was being offered. There were foods from countries I had only read about: Indian curries, Mexican tacos, Thai noodles, and much more. At one stall, I started talking to a vendor named Ahmed. He was selling traditional Middle Eastern sweets, and after offering me a sample, we began chatting. Ahmed was originally from Egypt and had moved to the city a few years ago to start his business. He told me about the challenges he faced as a new immigrant, but also how welcoming the city had been to him and his family. He explained some of the customs and traditions from his home country, and I was fascinated by how different yet similar our experiences were. We both had moved to the city looking for new opportunities, and we both were finding our way in this bustling, multicultural place. These kinds of encounters made me realize just how much the city had to offer, not just in terms of places and activities, but in terms of people. Every new person I met brought a new perspective, a new story, or a new piece of advice. It was exciting to learn about different cultures, to hear about people's journeys, and to share in their experiences. At work, I was becoming more comfortable with my team, and even started grabbing coffee with Sarah and James on the weekends. With Mr. Johnson, I had formed a kind of friendship that I never expected, finding joy in his stories about the city's history. And with my neighbors, I began to feel a sense of community that I hadn't anticipated when I first moved in. Meeting new people wasn't always easy. Sometimes it felt awkward, and other times I wasn't sure how to start a conversation. But I learned that most people, like me, were open to connection. Whether at work, in my apartment building, or out in the city, there were always opportunities to meet someone new. And with each new connection, the city began to feel less like a foreign place and more like a home filled with interesting, kind, and diverse people. Episode 6: Overcoming Larger Challenges. Life in the new city had been exciting and full of discoveries. I had begun to build a routine, make friends, and feel like I was starting to fit into my new surroundings. But as time passed, I faced some larger challenges that truly tested my resilience and forced me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. It was during these moments that I learned the most about myself and realized that this city was becoming my new home. The first challenge I encountered was one that no one ever plans for: getting sick. It started with a slight cough, which I ignored at first, thinking it was just the change in weather or maybe the city's air that I wasn't used to yet. But as the days went by, the cough worsened, and soon I was feeling weak and feverish. Being sick in a new city, away from the comfort of family, was much harder than I anticipated. I wasn't familiar with the healthcare system here, and I didn't know which doctor to see or where to go for help. I remember one particularly difficult night when I could hardly sleep because of the fever. Lying in bed, I felt alone and unsure of what to do. It was the first time since moving that I truly felt the distance from my old life, from the people I was used to relying on. But even in that challenging moment, I found support in unexpected places. The next morning, I forced myself to get up and find help. I texted Sarah, my coworker, and told her I wasn't feeling well. To my surprise, she immediately responded, offering to recommend a nearby clinic where I could see a doctor. Not only that, but she even offered to bring me soup later in the day, just to make sure I was okay. With her help, I managed to get to the clinic, where the doctor gave me some medication for what turned out to be a minor infection. The experience wasn't as bad as I had feared, and Sarah's kindness reminded me that I wasn't truly alone in this city. She and my other co-workers had become more than just people I worked with. They were becoming my friends, my support system in this new place. Once I recovered, I faced another challenge that I had been dealing with since I first arrived: the language barrier. Although I spoke the local language fairly well, there were still moments when I struggled to understand certain words or phrases, especially when talking to people in fast-paced conversations. At work, I sometimes felt like I couldn't fully express myself in meetings or casual discussions, and it made me feel self-conscious. I worried that people might think I was less capable or that I didn't belong. One day, during a team meeting, I was asked to present an idea for a new project. I had spent hours preparing my notes and rehearsing what I would say, but as soon as I stood up to speak, nerves took over. My mind went blank, and the words seemed to get stuck in my throat. I stumbled over my sentences, and halfway through, I could see the confused looks on my colleagues' faces. It was clear that they weren't fully understanding what I was trying to explain. After the meeting, I felt defeated. I went back to my desk, frustrated with myself. It was one of those moments where the challenge of living in a new place felt overwhelming. But then something unexpected happened. James, one of my co-workers, approached me. "Hey," he said, pulling up a chair next to my desk. "I know today was tough, but don't be too hard on yourself. We all have bad days. And honestly, your idea was great. We just need to work on presenting it a bit more clearly." James offered to help me practice for future meetings, and over the next few days, we spent time after work going over presentation skills. He gave me tips on how to structure my thoughts, how to speak more confidently, and how to simplify complex ideas. His support made a huge difference, and with time, I started feeling more comfortable speaking up in meetings again. The language barrier was still there, but I was learning to navigate it. I realized that making mistakes was part of the process, and instead of being afraid of them, I began to see them as opportunities to improve. Slowly, I gained confidence in my ability to communicate, both at work and in everyday life. Work wasn't the only place where I faced challenges. Navigating the city itself had become easier, but there were still moments when the size and pace of the city felt overwhelming. One weekend, I decided to explore a new neighborhood on the other side of town. I had heard that it was a vibrant area with great markets, restaurants, and parks, so I was excited to spend the day there. However, as I stepped off the bus and started walking around, I quickly realized that this part of the city was much busier than what I was used to. The streets were crowded, the traffic was loud, and I felt a bit lost in the chaos. I tried to follow the map on my phone, but after walking for what felt like hours, I still couldn't find the park I had been looking for. Frustrated and tired, I sat down on a bench to take a break. It was one of those moments where the excitement of exploring a new city turned into stress and confusion. But as I sat there, trying to figure out what to do next, a woman sitting on the bench next to me noticed my confused expression. "Are you lost?" she asked with a friendly smile. I nodded, feeling a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I was trying to find the park, but I think I took a wrong turn somewhere. She laughed softly. It happens to the best of us. The park's not far. Just take a left at the next corner and you'll see the entrance. It's a bit hidden, but it's beautiful once you're inside. I thanked her, feeling relieved. Her kindness was another reminder that the city, despite its size and hustle, was full of helpful people. With her directions, I found the park and spent the rest of the afternoon enjoying the peaceful greenery and open spaces. It felt like a small victory, another challenge overcome. As the weeks went by, I noticed something changing in me. The challenges that had once seemed so overwhelming, getting sick, struggling with language, getting lost, no longer felt like barriers. Instead, they became part of the adventure, part of the process of adapting to a new life. With each challenge, I found solutions, often with the help of the kind people I was meeting along the way. And with each solution, I gained more confidence. I started to see myself as capable of handling whatever came my way. I no longer felt like a stranger in the city. I felt like someone who belonged, someone who could navigate both the ups and downs of life here. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I paused to look around. The streets were filled with people heading home after a long day, just like me. The sounds of the city, the honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant music from a nearby cafe, felt familiar now, comforting even. I realized, in that moment, that this place was becoming my home. It wasn't just about the routines I had built or the places I had discovered. It was about the challenges I had faced and the way I had overcome them. Each obstacle had made me stronger, more resilient, and more connected to the city and the people in it. This was no longer just a place where I lived. It was a place where I was growing, learning, and building a life. And for the first time since I moved here, I felt truly at home.